I'm curious, like, where do you come in on this topic of Jesus as a guy that was kind of a normal dude who went to India, became a guru, so to speak, a remover of darkness, and then returned back to his homeland?
And that's all the time I have today. Great talking to you, Matt. Thanks so much, man. I'm very intrigued by the hypothesis of Jesus going to India.
All right, we are rolling, and I'm here with Bob Peck. How's it going this morning, brother?
Hey, Matt. How's it going? Thanks so much.
Doing great. Glad to have you, man. We met recently at a hang with James McRae and Michael Phillip up in Austin, and I was so surprised that we hadn't met before because there's just so much mutual interest going on.
We are doing the same thing in the same area, and it was about damn time.
Absolutely. So yeah, man, thank you for sending over that audiobook of your book, Original Sin is a Lie. I got about halfway through it, and I'm definitely going to finish it. But when I was in it, I was like, wow, how have I not heard this? How do I not know this guy? Because this is everything I'm interested in and more. And I also watched your film, The Kingdom Within, just last night in preparation for this. And again, blown away by just like the interest that you carry in this field of, you know, merging yoga with Christianity, but with also just religion and general spirituality. And I was curious, I've got a number of questions here, but just to kick it off, like, how did you discover the spiritual path? Like, what's that story of coming to be more inquisitive about, you know, what it is to be a human here on earth?
Yeah, thanks so much, man. Thanks so much for listening to the book and watching the film. And, you know, it's been fun to like have people kind of start to go back and watch my films from like 10 years ago. Like The Kingdom Within, I finished in like 14, 15. Wow. Back when I was 12 years old. No, I'm just kidding. It was my documentary like thesis, basically, at film school at UT. There's a couple of answers to this in terms of like the long-term association with comparative religion and mystic philosophy. I mean, I think the short answer is like people died.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I had about really 3, like, it wasn't my parents or siblings, which is like a tragic thing that a lot of people go through, but 2 grandparents and my dad's fiance, and a cousin. So It was 4 of them that died in about a 2-year period when I was like 11, 12. And, started reading. I read Thich Nhat Hanh, Living Buddha, Living Christ in like 7th grade, 13, 14, something like that. My mom said someone asked her recently, why is your son, like, he wrote a book about religion. Like, what's that about? And she goes, when all the other kids were reading Harry Potter, Bob was reading Thich Nhat Hanh. And that's true. Yeah. I've just been reading like little books about Buddhism for 20 years. I've just turned 36. So, really, really into it. And then kind of studying deeper dive in college and university around New Testament formation. That was really like, I just loved it so much in terms of seeing the humanness behind the formation of this religion that is, in American culture, is considered to be so divine. It's this perfect, unblemished creation, and that is not accurate, according to the scholarship and the history. And, you know, I think really what activated my heart in this whole process is the mystics. So men and women throughout history who have, you know, broken the veil, to use that language, who have kind of seen through the dream, seen through the false world of delusional separation. And what's crazy, what's super cool, is they sound the same. They all have the similar ideas and similar kind of different, terminology, different languages, different time periods, all these things. But when you break the veil, you start talking like this. And that's what Jesus did. That's what Buddha did. That's what all these masters that I try to write about and point to as a veil dweller myself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, so much resonance there. Actually, it was after what I call my awakening through psilocybin mushrooms that I started to see how similar all religions were, whereas previously I thought they were all so different. It was like, well, they believe in that, and they believe in that, and they believe in that, and it's also divided. It's like, why can't we all just get along, And I just never saw how interconnected it all was. But after that experience of this kind of like non-dual state that I had entered and remained in for a number of weeks, it's kind of crazy what happened. And I've talked about it quite a lot. So I don't want to get too deep into it, but it was just so apparent that everyone was saying the same thing, kind of like what you're saying. Like there was so much in common with these religious leaders, and it was never their intention to divide the planet. They were trying to unify humanity. And so it just made so much sense that, it was us trying to abuse the power structure that religion creates, to build power and to say, like, we're the only one, we're the right one, all others are false. And by doing that, you kind of, you create a whole new thing than I think what was intended by the founders of these religions.
The later generations lose touch with that initial spark, right. And that's a really consistent trend. I mean, there was Buddhist death squads. I mean, come on. I mean, and that was a few years ago in Rohingya in Myanmar and Burma, but there was even Buddhist samurai death cults in feudal Japan in the 1500s. So Buddha is someone who said that if you are being sawed by a man limb from limb and you react in anger, you're not my disciple.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So, people get it wrong eventually. And there's a great image that by a monk, Brother David Steindl-Rast, who when I heard this, I was so flustered that this image is not in my book because it encapsulates it so well, which is the volcano. So the initial, the initial human that strikes that chord, the Christ, the Krishna, the Buddha, and so on, it's like an explosion. It's so powerful and so spiritually raw and tangible that and unavoidable that the lava just goes up into the air, explodes, and it's just this massive force, and it starts going down the mountain. And after decades, centuries, millennia, the lava just becomes cold, dead rock. And so that's a pretty good image on it's a lot of what I'm doing, especially with the Christian piece, the book is called Original Sin is a Lie. So I'm calling out issues with Christian doctrine, but I'm a huge fan of that man from Nazareth. His teachings touch my heart deeply, and I, consider him to be one of the highest beings, kind of a big brother of humanity. And right. So it's a real joy. Kind of, not only am I going back to Christians and saying it's not quite a divine document, it's not quite a infallible document, let's look at the development of it, let's look at the different variations and interpretations of it. I'm also going to secular crowd and saying, I realize, your upbringing might not have been the best, or, force feeding this stuff wasn't that appetizing, but there's some good stuff in here. And there's some real transformational, practical teachings in here that have, a lot of legitimacy and power. And so I'm kind of poking at both of those crowds a little bit warmly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I did grow up going to a Catholic church. As a kid, you don't really know how strange that sect of Christianity is. You just kind of, hey, this is what my parents brought me to and must be here for a reason. And I actually did really resonate with a lot of the teachings about forgiveness, about, just Jesus's whole message. I remember actually taking it to heart and being like, this is actually really cool. It was some time later in like social studies class through middle school or high school or whenever it was that, you learn about like the Holy Crusades in which they would kill people in the name of God, like convert to Christianity or we will kill you. And I was like, wait a sec, I thought that Christianity was good, like why would they be killing people? So it took me down this rabbit hole of discovering just how misled it seemed to have gotten away from the original teachings. And eventually I kind of renounced, I guess, my religious nature, and I went to kind of an agnostic nature and almost an atheist nature. Some of my best friends actually turned atheist through high school, and I could see where they were coming from. I didn't want to say there's no God for sure, but I also was like, you know what, you make some good points, So I even read the book The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. And I liked it. I was like, this guy's making sense, So I remained agnostic up until that mushroom journey when I just felt like I could see so much interconnectedness that there's so much more to the world than the eye can see. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. We know that with frequencies and Wi-Fi and all this stuff that we know it's there, but we just don't see it. And I got that gigantic perception opening experience of just like, there is so much more than what the eye can see. We as humans are so limited in what we're able to perceive that there is so much greater, there's so much greater reality out there than we are privy to in our normal base state of consciousness. And therefore, I am interested to hear what people have to say about this. And when you go back, you start to see, this has actually been a through line through all mystical traditions, all religions. They all talk about the oneness. They all talk about the divine realm, the source that we all emanate from. We all are the Son of God because we're all receiving the signal from the source. And we're so much more alike than different. And those were just like the downloads I was getting through my research and through that mushroom journey. I was like, I need to look into all these religions, all these traditions, just with an open mind this time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Wade on in the water.
Exactly.
Yeah. Huxley wrote a book called The Perennial Philosophy, which is kind of like one of the first like comparative religion treatises saying like they're all the same. It's Frank 42, 45, something like that. He wrote Brave New World and Psychedelic Experience, I think. The mescaline one. Anyway, he was a pioneer. He was a polymath, brilliant writer and novelist. And my book is kind of like the millennial version, whatever. Trying to be more accessible. Right. Because it's a tough read, admittedly, despite his genius. But yeah, the perennial philosophy. And the Hindus. You talked about the different religions like bickering about the different interpretations. One of my favorite images is the 4 blind men and the elephant.
Yes.
Which I write about in the book, which you might have listened to, which is...
I did. I heard that part. I love it. Please say it. Yes.
Yeah, I'll give the brief version. It's, essentially an elephant walks into this village and 4 blind men come out to, check it out, see what it is. And the first one feels the trunk and says, this being is like a hose. And the second one feels the leg and says, this being is like a column. And the third one feels the ear and says, this being is like a big tree leaf, and then the fourth man feels the tail and says, no, it's like a rope. And they're all just sitting there arguing. And then, a person with sight comes along and says, you're all correct. It's not that you're wrong, because the leg is like a column. But that's the issue, is that it's just the leg.
Right.
and the tail is like a rope, but that's just the tail. So it's all of these and more. There's actually more characteristics of this being that none of you have touched yet, felt yet, that is a part of this being. And that's, I think, a really, every interfaith dispute could be settled with that image,
exactly.
Just about, in terms of saying, let's respect the columnness of the leg.
Right.
That's okay. Like, Muslims get to worship God from the viewpoint of submission.
Yeah.
That's how they view it, and that's their right. And it's a beautiful path, and it leads to the divine. And let's also allow the Jews and the Christians and the Buddhists don't worship God necessarily, but the language, awakening, enlightenment, it's all the same to mystics. So yeah, let's just respect each other's paths in a way, and not deny their validity. It's like, if I have an enemy, Matt, it's just exclusivity. It's not any person or thing or concept. Essentially, it's just the idea, or it is a concept. It's just the idea that this way is the only way.
Right, 1000%. And what that brings up in my mind as well is how, when you do touch into that transcendent divine realm through psychedelics, through meditation, through chance, just through the way your brain was wired as a kid, who knows what it could have been.
Right.
It is beyond words. It's literally ineffable. And so when you come back, as you're receding from the great oneness, you have no other way to explain it than the language and the culture that you grew up in. And so that is why it may be a leg to one person and a tail to one person and a tusk to one person, because they just grew up with this set of words, this set of
we're tusk people.
Exactly. Yeah, like this set of values. And so the only way to metaphoricize that great ineffability would be to put it this way. And of course, people from that similar culture and similar place of value, similar values that they hold, would latch onto that because, hey, I'm from that culture too, and I like that. So it's like, Buddha got his followers because he said it in a way that resonates with that culture in that area. And then Jesus got his followers because of that same thing. Lao Tzu got his followers because of that same thing. But they're all touching on the great ineffable oneness, the divinity, the love, the infinite nature of reality, right?
Very well put. Yeah, Course in Miracles, which you might not have got to that part, I introduce it later on, is a 20th century spiritual masterpiece. I'm a big fan. It's a non-dual text, and we can talk more about it. But basically, one of its great lines is it said, "Words are twice removed from reality," in that words are just symbols for form. And form itself is not real, or not capital R real. It's not absolutely real. And so form is a symbol of separation, and it's not a real thing. And then words are just trying to capture form. So good luck. We're finger painting the Mona Lisa, basically.
Right.
And that this is my favorite. You said Lao Tzu in Taoism. This is one of my favorite guys ever. Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi. So Zhuangzi is a few hundred years after Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is like this. Might not have walked the earth. He did, but he's kind of more mythological. We don't know hardly anything about him. We just have the Tao Te Ching. And a few hundred years later, there's this guy, Zhuangzi. Ram Dass pronounces his name Chung Su. That's the improper Chinese pronunciations. No offense, Ram Dass. I love you, King. But anyway, Zhuangzi was a poet, and he was very funny. He was like he's worth reading all his stuff, but he says on words, he says, the fish trap exists because of the fish. Once you've gotten the fish, you can forget the trap. The rabbit snare exists because of the rabbit. Once you've caught the rabbit, you can forget the snare. Words exist because of meaning. Once you've gotten the meaning, you can forget the words. Where can I find a man who has forgotten words so I can have a word with him?
I love it.
Isn't that good? I mean, that's a 2,500-year-old joke.
Yeah.
So
that is so brilliant.
And it lands.
Yes, it does. Yeah, I remember I discovered Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching through Wayne Dyer, who I was a fan. I was a fan of because of his film, which is escaping me at the moment. What was it?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, he was very prolific, but I've seen a lot of Wayne lectures, and he's great. Rest in power.
Yes, he has a film. It's kind of a fictional film about these people that come to a retreat center to sit with him, and it's kind of based on reality, like probably what he does for work. But it is fiction. They are actors. He's portraying himself more or less. I really should know the name of the film, but essentially I was so touched by the wisdom he shared about each of these people at this retreat's dilemmas and interpersonal issues. And I was like, dude, this guy's awesome. So I guess
he has a great voice too. My God.
Absolutely. Yeah. So many years later, just being a fan of him, I finally found like him reading Tao Te Ching, and I was like, that sounds like a cool title. I don't know what it is, but let me hear it. And of course, as it opens, you're already sucked in by like the first lines, like the Tao that can be told isn't the true Tao. It's like, oh, it knows what I've seen, as
right.
far as like, what I've seen in my mushroom experiences and that type of thing. So
right. In 2 tiny little lines.
Exactly.
It captures it all.
It does. And so I just listened to the whole thing. I believe I found it on YouTube and was sucked into the world of Taoism. And if I was to pick a religion I identify most closely with, I would say Taoism for sure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
But I like them all.
You'd love Zhuangzi. There's a great book. I found Zhuangzi through Thomas Merton, who was I don't think Franciscan. He was a monk. He was more like an Orthodox monk from America, and he did a lot of work in the East and knew like Zen Buddhists, and I think died in Asia actually, but. He was a mystic, and people love Merton. He's a hero to me, kind of a West and East merging. His biography is called The 7-Story Mountain, and but he has a really good book on Zhuangzi. It's called like I don't know, Merton on Zhuangzi or whatever it is, and it's like I really like when kind of people outside of the tradition find somebody. Get their commentary on the tradition. So Father Thomas Merton on Taoism and Taoist poetry, like it's a really interesting look because it's scholarly and mystical, but the way he speaks about it just highlights the perennial nature of it all. Same thing with Yogananda, as you know now, halfway into my book, Paramahansa Yogananda. There he is, smiling upon us. Practically a devotee here. He was obsessed with Jesus. I mean, he wrote prolifically about the New Testament and Jesus as what he considers and what I consider Jesus to be an avatar. It's kind of another word in that language of mystic masters who broke the veil, who kind of eliminated their own sense of individuality, who just became pure vessels of spirit, right? Yogananda's, sometimes people will say, like, how do you interpret this line from Jesus? And sometimes I go, well, let's just see what Yogananda said, because what I'm trying to do, Matt, is like, I honor the scholarship. I think there's a really key component in understanding, like, for example, biblical history, the composition of the Gospels, the political agendas around the Gospels formations, each of them, Paul's letters, what Paul was doing in his life. I love all that stuff in terms of the New Testament, just as an example, but I also want to know what the mystics' interpretations are, and I feel like, for me, I need both. It's like I think there's some mystics that just read Yogananda and that's all you need, and come up the chakras and boom, there you go, and that's beautiful. But also, I think the nature of my work is Christians will kind of question me or whatever, and ask me about things, challenge me on things, and I can come with the receipts on the timeline of the history of the translation, etc.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, it's like there's a lot of conversations in Bible scholarship land and like religious scholarship land that's devoid of the mystical interpretation, that doesn't, Dan McClellan, for example. I love Dan McClellan. I'm a big fan. I just posted him yesterday. He has a really great like takedown about hell. There's this huge Christian like TikToker gal who like does this thing about like 5 things you should know about hell. Like Dan just destroys this lady, and he goes, don't attack this person. He's a very professional and objective, but it's like really good stuff. And at the same time, Dan McClellan has not read Yogananda. He probably, I'd be surprised if he has. And I don't know that for sure, but I'd be surprised if he, has had a psychedelic experience or,
sure,
seen the universe in a sunflower. I doubt it. And so for me, having both of those worlds is that's what's really exciting about this stuff.
Yeah, 1000%, man. I did find that Wayne Dyer film is called The Shift for anyone wanting to check it out.
Cool.
And no wonder it hit me. I mean, I probably was sucked in by the title because that's great. That's a great title. But to touch on what you were just speaking on, man, this is one of the topics I wanted to bring up, which was Yogananda and Kriya Yoga. Yeah. It's something I discovered later in my spiritual search and quest for understanding. I had actually first discovered Kundalini Yoga. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah. So I discovered that one first. And inside of that school of yoga, they refer to almost all the exercises as kriyas. When I would just search Kriya, that's like a weird word. Like, what does that mean? I would search it up and I would find Kriya Yoga and I would find Yogananda. And I would be like, whoa, is this the same or is this different? Like, is Kundalini and Kriya kind of just like remixing? Is Kundalini a remix of Kriya? Like, which came first, So I would research into it. And it does seem that Kundalini practice and Kundalini Tantra practice does date back thousands of years. But then you start to learn about Kriya Yoga, which does as well. And they're very similar systems in that they're working on the subtle energies of the bodies, the nadis, which are the psychic energy channels through which energy and prana and apana flow, the chakras, which are like the hubs of energy, as we know, that correlate to certain emotions and all of this. And I eventually a film had come out about the life of Yogananda called Awake, which I was like blown away by. I watched it like 3 times in 3 days, so I was like, this guy is awesome. I got to learn more. Eventually, you learn about Babaji, who is like, wow, did that really happen? Because part of me is like, this is unbelievable that a guy could be this kind of thousands of years old and appear like a 20-year-old. But I don't know. So many people do hold faith in that. And so I wanted to ask you, how you stumbled into Kriya Yoga and Yogananda's work, and essentially what drew you to it, and also what you've benefited in practicing it.
Yeah, really great stuff. And I applaud your similar way of arriving to him, like stumbling into him. It's kind of like it seems like that's what happens. Maybe algorithms are helping more nowadays.
Sure.
But, over the years, like you kind of just like have a conversation with someone, and then you stumble into a book or a magazine that references the thing, and it's like, oh, what's this? And then you go down. Right. My dad had Autobiography of a Yogi, which is his masterpiece life story. On a ski trip we went on. I think it was like the last ski trip I went on, like when I was 16 or 17 or something, with him and our fam, and I just remember seeing that smiling face. And he's not even like a yogi or any, he's not even into the Eastern stuff as much as me. And he's an open-minded spiritual student and reader, my dad. But I read it shortly after that, kind of in college when I was studying New Testament stuff, pretty hardcore, Indian Buddhism, Hindu philosophy, shamanism, all that stuff. And I just really, really enjoyed his autobiography. And to your point, it's not for everyone. It's a bit metaphysical in terms of the claims he makes in his life. For people who aren't familiar, he was born in, the 1890s, I think 1893, something like that. He died in 1952, around there, both of those dates. But he, essentially was this very spiritual little boy in, 100 years ago, 125 years ago, India. And he would go around and like try to meet saints and try to kind of meet miracle workers and stuff like that. And the stories are incredible. To your point, he meets all these different, he's trying to find a guru, he's trying to find a teacher. And he doesn't for, many years. He's kind of, and he gets discouraged and he tries to run away to the Himalayas as kind of a comedic moment where his brother tracks him down on a train and things like that. It's it's a great little like narrative of his life. But yeah, there's one called The Saint with Two Bodies, where he goes and kind of runs an errand for his dad and goes and sees this Swami, and this other guy sees the same Swami at the same time, and there's kind of little like flickers of like the Matrix glitching out for young Yogananda on his like early days of spiritual path. And of course he meets his teacher, Sri Teshwar, who's in the lineage of Mahavatar Babaji and Lahiri Mahashaya, to your point. And so, it's really profound. It's a very, I think for anyone who's like intrigued by Hindu philosophy, yoga philosophy, I think the psychedelic crowd also like does pretty well with it too, because after you've had psychedelic experiences that were profound and spiritual, you're much more open-minded to kind of the bending of, so-called material existence. Whereas some people, especially I do mindfulness meditation work at Meta as my day job in corporate land. Nice. And it's very secular. It's not, I can't go around talking about Babaji and, and this eternal immortal sage who appears and transfigures as an orb and so on. To that crowd, they want to know the scientific research studies of the different areas of the brain that light up when you meditate, and that's cool, and I respect that. But at the same time, I'm open to Yogananda, and I think another thing that it immensely practical, kind of to carry on with Kriya Yoga. It's when I read that book, I said, I have to learn this. Yeah. And so there are Kriya Yoga centers all over. And so that was kind of my way into yoga. Now I do some hatha yoga, I do some physical yoga years later. But I came into all this stuff after reading Autobiography, like 2021, something like that. Yeah. And, to your point, I've made that comparison before around, it's like Kundalini yoga. Essentially what you do is you breathe up from the lowest chakra, deeply inhale up to the crown. And then you breathe down to the second, and then up to the crown, down to the third. And you just you're just moving that energy up over time. You're thinking of God, you're thinking of the gurus, you're thinking of your intention for, just having a higher intention for your conscious awareness. And it's immensely beautiful practice. A good way to kind of close my little pitch or teaser on Yogananda is that when he died, he kind of predicted it. He told his disciples he would not be around long, pretty subtly, and he gave a big lecture on his two loves, India and America. He moved to America in 1920, and in Boston, traveled the country, wound up in California, and he died in Los Angeles. He went back to India once or twice, but he he was the first Swami to spend most of his life in America. And he died in 52, 53, and he gave this big speech and then had a heart attack. And
wow.
Like right when he finished. And the bizarre thing, which is like kind of the footnote at the end of the book, is the local mortuary, the California mortuary, which director, who was not a devotee, wrote a notarized letter to the Self-Realization Fellowship, his organization, that after, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, it was something ridiculous, there was not a single sign of decay on the body whatsoever. He just had a perfectly preserved body for weeks after his death. And they were tripping out about that. They'd never seen anything like that, and I think it's just a cool exclamation point on his incarnation. It's like when you are kind of living in a space of like light and just awareness and love and just higher stuff, like you don't have the subtler gross body things. And so anyway, a lot of it's like his whole life was just miracles, and that's what I think kind of coming back to like the Bible and like the mystics across the traditions. It's like the miracles from Jesus aren't that crazy to me anymore. It's like Christians believe in the miracles, and then atheists or agnostics don't really, or the atheists don't, agnostics mostly don't. The mystics were kind of open to the miracles of Jesus because Yogananda did them. Milarepa in Tibetan Buddhism, he did miracles. You name a Hindu guru in the last 1,000 years, and they've done some kind of miracles. It's because they've transcended form. It's not that big a deal. Jokingly, of course it is, but it's not that uncommon, in that space. So, Yogananda, he's a modern master.
Yeah, I love that. And I do have a number of questions on the miracles, but briefly, I wanted to know, in the amount of time you've practiced Kriya Yoga, have you had like a transcendent experience with that practice?
It's pretty incremental for me. I've noticed over the years that I've become more open, more peaceful, more compassionate, less hard on myself, less hard on others. I'm absolutely working through plenty of stuff. But this is such a stupid example, but I can't help it. I dropped a giant jar of paste salsa in my kitchen a few weeks ago. And that is a terrible thing. It's like glass everywhere. I'm a child, so it's like, it's dangerous. Just wasted all the salsa. Like years ago, I would have been so mad about that. And I just laughed. And I was like, okay, a few minutes after that, I was like, okay, like I'm a little more grounded now because I'm just kind of, maybe I'm delirious, because I'm smiling, cleaning this up, but something's working. And, I think it's just been incremental. I think in terms of an experience, it's really just feeling a real sense of like love and maybe even empathy for people and beings. And, but for me, I got a ways to go. I'm the billboard for the buffet line.
Nice. Oh, I love that. Yeah, it did bring a quote to mind that I don't remember the exact words of it, but it was something along the lines of a student asking the teacher, how will I know I'm making progress? And the teacher said something along the lines of, what used to make you mad, you will now find funny.
That's good.
So that makes a lot of sense. And that does take me back to that non-dual state I was in after the mushrooms, where, yeah, like little things I would knock something off of a ledge and just be like, oopsie, I'm silly, instead of like, what's wrong with you? You're stupid. It's just a complete transmutation of the inner dialogue, which is so beautiful. But I have heard, are you familiar with Ryan Kurzak?
Mm-mm.
He's a Kriya Yoga teacher on YouTube, who interviews other Kriya yogis. And in his interviews, not only does he say about himself, but a lot of people that he interviews say that they have like these cosmic psychedelic experiences through Kriya Yoga. I think it's probably just a matter of sitting for longer and longer and longer. And I remember one dude said he was sitting for like hours and hours, like 3-4 hours. I know like the general practice is something like 30 minutes to an hour.
Right.
But as you just like go deeper and deeper and deeper into these states, that's when I guess you might potentially pop out and have that experience that people get on psychedelics, especially like what I hear about happening on 5-MeO.
I don't deny that. I think there definitely is value in like experiencing those states. I've also read there's another amazing modern saint that's I consider an avatar also, in Paramahansa Ramakrishna, who Ram Dass references a lot also, and he's worth studying and getting to know. He was an illiterate ecstatic, sometimes he's called. He would fall into samadhi, and he would actually hurt himself. His nephew would have to kind of walk nearby him and catch him because he would fall into samadhi like every day.
Wow.
And his whole thing was all about interfaith connectivity. He actually kind of studied not only a variety of Hindu traditions, which by the way, Hinduism is like the most diverse thing ever, and it's not even called Hinduism. Hinduism is what the colonizers called it. Part of me is almost regretful that I call it Hinduism in the book so much, because it's called Sanatana Dharma. It's this extremely rich. Hindu just means east of the Indus River. So the Sanatana Dharma is Sanskrit for holy science, and it's like there's all these different sects of yoga, there's all these different sects of different deities, it's an incredibly rich tradition. There's no such thing as Hinduism proper. Anyway, that said, within Indian systems, he studied under a variety of different teachers and masters. He also practiced Islam, he also practiced Christianity, but he was also this like childlike, sweet, innocent man, Ramakrishna. So deep bow to him. He and Yogananda and kind of the Kriya gurus, they're technically separate lineages, but some of the people overlap a little bit. Once you really study this stuff, you'll see like they're all just tributaries from the great rivers. But anyway, what I was getting to about that is Yogananda and Ramakrishna both specifically kind of warn us against being too caught up in the allure of blissful states or ecstatic states or Siddhis, right? Siddhi, which is like, those, it's kind of like powers. It's like, if you meditate for, a few years, for long periods of time, you will gain some level of control of the material world. And, Ramakrishna is pretty insistent on that being a trap and that being a real sticky situation, because the ego wants to, use it and start using it for its own purposes, et cetera. So they kind of say, just like, keep going, like push through those. Because those are kind of not the end goal. The end goal is the divine union, right?
Yes. I 1000% agree. And, in certain psychedelic states, I've been, working in those states for 10 years now. I have encountered what I would guess they were referring to as Siddhis. And I'd also heard the warnings, and I totally understood why there are warnings about it, because it's going to be hard to function as a human when you're as large as the universe or as small as an atom. I've experienced those things in these trippy states.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, so it can happen. Okay. But I do see why they warn about this, So I really resonate with that. And I think that it is kind of a distraction from the greater work, which is to beautify your life and the life of those around you. How can you do that if you're so sucked into these heightened states of consciousness and you're just in samadhi all the time?
Yeah, and I think it's still like it's a lesser evil than taking advantage of others, or what it's like. There's so much of our world that's like caught up in egoic pursuits and stuff like that, so it's still like if you need some city motivation, that's better than other things probably. But what's so great about what I really like about reading the stories of the mystics, Matt, is that there are practical lessons. It's not all just concepts, because they explain, because they have little plot moments, little stories of that kind of validate the concept itself. Like Yogananda will talk about warning of cities, and then he'll like tell the story of how the student of a master, a traveling teacher, or whatever, the student learns. I'm paraphrasing here, but the student learns the technique, and then they become this rich and famous, powerful person, and self-obsessed and so on. And then the master comes years later, but in kind of a disguise, as kind of like a wandering beggar or whatever, and the student is, dismissive and kind of indolent about the person, and then the master reveals himself, and the student is like, "Oh my God, I was misled by my own power." So it's like that story cements, instead of him just saying, "Hey, don't fucking get caught up in doing this stuff," he paints the picture. He paints a real nice picture.
Dude, 1000%. I've not heard that one. That makes so much sense. So
I highly recommend Autobiography of Yogi. I mean, it's sold millions of copies, and I was telling somebody this, and they almost got upset. George Harrison passed it around, which is kind of cool. The Kriya Yogis are on Sgt. Pepper. Oh, wow. And which is really rad. He wore a Babaji pin, and he's actually, there's a picture of George Harrison wearing a Babaji pin, shaking Gerald Ford's hand.
Yeah.
President Ford's hand. Harrison has a Babaji pin on. So he was like a big Yogananda fan. Steve Jobs was obsessed with Autobiography of a Yogi. It was the only book on his iPad when he died. And when everyone, I think it was the gift to everyone at his funeral. Yeah. They were all given a copy of it. So he was really into it. I told somebody that, and they go, "Why the heck do I care that these big..." It's like, it doesn't really matter. It just shows that, kind of behind the scenes of like, what's the biggest, one of the biggest cultural influences of the 20th century, the Beatles. They influenced art and society and music, obviously, and everything. And Yogananda, was influencing one of them, and Steve Jobs, like literally iPhone, like it's the biggest company in the world, $2 trillion. Absolutely. Who was he obsessed with? So, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I do have the book. I'm really terrible at reading. I'm more. This
conversation is a commercial.
I'm more of a. Good. Yeah, I'm more of an audio book listener, and I have begun Autobiography of a Yogi. If I'm not mistaken, it is quite long as far as the audio book. So I think I switched books or something, so I do need to finish it. But I did hear...
it starts off slow. It starts off literally like how his parents met.
Right.
Some people have told me they started it and couldn't get into it. Just stick with it. Get to when he's like a preteen, because it gets funny and cool. Yeah, but excited. It starts like a little bit too mythological for some people. But the best one's read by Kriyananda. One of his disciples, J. Donald Walters, reads it, and it's great.
Oh, great. Okay, well, I'll see if that's the version that I've listened to, or I'll pick it up. But so one of the questions I have was about Jesus as a yogi. Mm-hmm. Did he travel to India? Did he learn Kriya Yoga? And is that how he potentially became what we know Jesus to be. I know that Christians generally think he was just born the Son of God. He was born an avatar. He was born, that was going to be his destiny the whole while, because God was going to make it happen because he's the Son of God, But part of me does feel like there was a realistic story to Jesus, that yes, he became a divine, freaking amazing healer and amazing leader, spiritual leader. But he had to initiate himself. He had to learn the lessons. He had to come into contact with things in the very same way that we all do as humans, to be able to carry that energy. So it would make sense to me, and I've heard in your book, but also for a decade now, about his potential travels to India, where he was known as Issa, and he was studying with quote unquote ascended masters, yogis. He may have learned Kriya Yoga. He may have tried what they wouldn't have called psychedelics back then, but he may have ingested something or another that gave him spiritual sight, So I'm curious, like, where do you come in on this topic of Jesus as a guy that was kind of a normal dude who went to India, became a guru, so to speak, a remover of darkness, and then returned back to his homeland?
And that's all the time I have today. Great talking to you, Matt. Thanks so much, man. I'm very intrigued by the hypothesis of Jesus going to India. And I do write about it in the book. And, I think kind of like the preface here with this is, like, there's plenty of like mystic channels now on YouTube of people being like, Jesus went to India, da da da. And like, I have never claimed that, because frankly, we just don't have the evidence, not to disappoint. But I'll explain why I'm very, very open to the possibility of, there's a jump cut in the Bible.
Right.
So he's 12 years old in the temple teaching to the priests, which is probably not very historical. That's what the Jewish hero in the Old Testament, that's what they do. That's what the hero always does, is they're a kid and they teach the authority.
Sure.
So even the 12-year-old thing, it's probably not that accurate. But we jump from that to he's 30, he's getting baptized by John the Baptist. So there's 18 years in the New Testament of his life. They're called the lost years of Jesus. Well, what was going on? He was a day laborer, right? So we have a lot of material about his teaching period, but he wasn't an emperor. He wasn't, it's incredible, frankly, that he became the most famous human being on planet Earth, considering his socioeconomic status and corner of a sleepy Roman province. He wasn't even near the capital of the Roman Empire, right? The reason Yogananda, so we don't have the evidence, is from the Bible. Bible scholars are kind of more skeptical, but they're also not, no, he did not, because they're specifically looking at data.
Sure.
Yogananda says he did, and it's because a few things. Essentially, when an avatar is born, or when like a very high being is born, or like their birth, significant kind of astrological things happen. There's signs in the world. The matrix glitches a little bit, right? And the way Yogananda frames it, which is actually true in the Bible, in Matthew, I think it's Matthew 2:1, the Magi, which, by the way, what the heck are Magi? It's like, what does that word even mean? It means, it essentially means like holy men. In Matthew, it's who came from the east. Is the actual line in Matthew. So east of Judea is India. What Yogananda says is they were, these holy men, these rishis from India, saw the signs and were kind of told, hey, come and honor the next avatar. And so the boy Jesus, when he's, 13, 14, 15, whatever, takes a caravan basically to go over there and learn from them and honor their journey that blessed his birth. And, I will say too, kind of to the skeptics of this, like, it's not that unlikely. We know that there were trade routes at that time. Even Alexander the Great, I don't mention this in the book, I wish I did. Alexander the Great had a yogi teacher 300 years before Jesus. So Alexander the Great kind of connected the Greco-Roman world to India.
Wow.
3 centuries before. So, there was crossover, there was overlap. The period around, Jesus's time was extremely diverse in terms of this crossing of cultural ideals and around the Mediterranean. It was just a very beautiful overlapping time. And so it's not that crazy. There was a guy, the first kind of theory that came out was a guy named Nicholas Notovich, who was a Russian who studied in Tibet in the 1800s. And he claimed he visited this monastery called the Hemis Monastery in Tibet, where he was allegedly shown a scroll that explained Jesus's visit and study and so on. We don't have the scroll. We haven't been able to find it. I do point people to, actually, I mentioned Ramakrishna earlier. 2 devotees of Ramakrishna were allegedly did the same thing. They went to Tibet and according to Abbot George Burke, Swami Nirmalanda did verify seeing the text as well. I'll point people to OCOY.org. It's Original Christianity, Original Yoga.org. It's Abbot George Burke. His Hindu name is Swami Nirmalananda. He's a New Mexico mystic teacher who knows mystic Christianity, mystic Hindu yoga very deeply. He's compiled the most exhaustive research on Jesus in India and the potentiality there. So I'll point people there. I also mentioned, I do point to, as you said, I think that's what you're alluding to, the Bhavishya Mahapurana is a 5th century Sanskrit document. Where there's a really bizarre kind of moment which describes an Indian king coming to the Himalayas and saw, like, essentially a white dude meditating. And he literally says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I come from the land. I preached the Dharma to the non-Indians. And I asked human beings to serve the Lord. I suffered." It's very Jesus-like, and it's like a totally different culture and totally different scene that kind of put him in there. So, it's very cool and interesting, and I think it explains a lot of the mystic Jesus, the Luke 17:21 Jesus, the kingdom is within you Jesus, that I like and subscribe to in my interpretations of him as a mystic, more so than the fire and brimstone guy that America created.
I agree. Yeah, to me, it feels like there is a bright side to seeing Jesus as a man who achieved what he achieved, and not this one of all time dude that God freaking like plopped down with his divine hand, and this guy's gonna be the most famous guy ever, and he's got my power backing him. He's got me on. I've got him on my shoulder
right now.
He's ready to roll. He doesn't have to learn anything. He knows it all inherently. I don't know. I think there's a lot to gain from seeing him as a normal person who was able to transform himself so thoroughly that he became what he became, because that gives us the notion that it's possible within ourselves as well, and not that we have to put all the faith in some other guy.
It almost invalidates him in some way to say he didn't have to. It's like it even kind of takes away some blood, sweat, and tears and hard work of his own inner journey that he went through, in my view, to say, oh no, he's God and was always in the.
Yeah.
Yeah, the book is called Original Sin is a Lie. So I have issues with institutional Christian doctrine. And, I do my best, Matt. In the book, I point to, a variety of verses in the New Testament and also in Thomas, which is extremely important book about Jesus's teachings that we discovered last century. That are all pointing to what you just said, that, self-discovery and self-inquiry of like finding the divine in your heart. And kind of back to the very, very earlier point that I made, like that sounds just like Milarepa. That sounds just like Rumi. That sounds just like Anandamayi Ma. That sounds like all these different men and women. It's like once you study the Bible scholarship of it, and the world mystics, it's like it's almost like frustrating, because it's so apparent that he was a mystic master. He was somebody who broke the veil and found it in himself and taught us how to find it in others. And for some reason, it's just the politics of that period, the politics of the needs of his community that essentially modulated his message in order to gain momentum as a system. Created this watered down thing that doesn't really represent what he was trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it comes up that I feel like we would do Jesus's spirit and we would do Jesus proud, so to speak, by becoming more like him than to remain ourselves and just ask for forgiveness while we constantly fuck up.
Without any intention to better ourselves whatsoever,
Right. And I saw that in the church as I was becoming agnostic. It's just like, oh, so you can be a piece of shit, and as long as you go to church and say, God forgive me, it's all good. Something never clicked about that. I was like, no, you should actually be good. And then when you go to church, it's even better because like it's charging you up to continue to be good. And it's just such a polar thing. You know what I mean?
Well, and also, to your point, like Christianity, especially, global, but even American Christianity is not a monolith. There's, thousands of denominations. There's hundreds of thousands of churches, and so there's a spectrum, right? There's communities and human beings in Christianity that are so so proximate to the true divine path and the real teaching, and I honor them, and I honor that, and there's so many that are on the other end of it, and I think the headlines and the hypocrisy and everything that we're all kind of having this deconstruction moment, is like a big term for it, is good. It needs to be called out. But at the same time, I do want to support. I mean, I did food bank work for many years here in Austin, and half the time was with a yoga group and half the time was with a church. And this pastor fed people for 30 years every Saturday. And it's because that's in Matthew. Jesus tells us to feed hungry people and to comfort sick people and to welcome travelers and to visit people in prison. And they say, and he says, the least of what you did for them, you did for me.
Yeah.
And so there's real Christians that understand that and see the Christ in the homeless man that needs the food. And so, I really honor that. But you're right. It's like, it shouldn't be an excuse, There's a really good line, which I didn't come up with. Somebody commented this about a year ago, but I was saying it, which is a lot of Christians, the hypocritical Christians, are they're worshiping the doorway instead of walking through it.
Amen. Yeah.
So that's pretty clear indictment of what's happening. This doorway is so great, it's all golden and ornate, and let's worship the doorway. Right. And the mystics are going, it's open.
Exactly.
Let's go in it.
I love that. Well, I actually wrote a lot more questions than we have time for, but while we have a little bit more time, and maybe we'll have to come back sometime and finish this, but I did want to know, have you ever happened to see these Vice documentaries or just YouTube documentaries about like these second comings of Christ? Like people who have essentially created communities and they're like, I am him. And these people buy into it. And they move their whole family there, and they give all their money to him.
There was one in Siberia.
That's the one, not
still
from Vice.
Going on. Yeah, that's
he probably is,
one.
and I haven't stayed up to date with it, but I just remember being intrigued by that thought. Is like
his pictures everywhere.
Like, what do you think about that? Do you think that someone kind of like riding the coattails, or maybe they're a spiritual guy themselves, and they almost have a delusion and they honestly believe it? Or could it be legit? Like, who's to say? I don't know.
So Yogananda's New Testament commentary is 2 volumes. Mm-hmm. It's very large. I mean, it's he basically took almost every red letter verse in the 4 Gospels and then wrote like a page or 2 about it, or more, and references the Gita and references. It's unbelievable. The name of it is The Second Coming of Christ, the Resurrection of the Christ Within You. Mm-hmm. And that's the mystic message, is just that the second coming is our own awakening. There's not going to be, the idea of like Jesus on a cloud or whatever, like that's all later invention. And the fact that there's grifters and opportunists taking that, is not surprising in the least, because the ego wants to, essentially the ego is all about specialness. The ego is all about making me, I know more than you. I know I'm better than you. And you should listen to me. And they and us and them and me. And, that's what the ego does. It's level, hierarchical. Whereas the mystics see no division. Mm-hmm. They see complete unity and oneness and equality across all people and all beings. Yeah. So that's a good kind of yardstick. Mm-hmm. It's like, is this some hierarchical thing, or is this a unity thing? Like, and at the same time, Matt, that doesn't mean, I think I've had some like long, deep conversations, some of which were at the bar late at night before it closes, around like, it doesn't mean be a doormat. Mm-hmm. I think some people think like, oh, unity, we're all one. Like, what about all the bad things in the world? And what about all the, evil people doing bad things? And it's like that, it just doesn't justify doormatness to me. Thich Nhat Hanh is a great example. MLK is a great example in the modern context of deeply spiritual people who stood up against injustice. But what happens is you actually become more activated, typically. Sure, there's renunciant mystics that kind of have their cave meditation for their incarnation or whatever. Maybe that's like a power-up incarnation. We don't know. We're not zoomed out with the vantage point to understand it all. But there's plenty of, hardcore mystics that are extremely active in the world and stand up against injustice and corruption, and do so from a sense of compassion and from a sense of love and unity. So I have to kind of disclaim that, because I get that a lot. People talk about unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness, and that's all nice and everything until somebody knocks your door down or whatever. And it's like, right. you can still put someone in jail and have compassion for them.
Sure.
It's actually less compassionate to let them go on committing bad acts.
Sure, yeah.
It's more compassion to them, because that's you're operating from the universe's standpoint of giving them a reflective period of contemplation. You know, I'm talking in a vacuum, obviously, because the American justice system is corrupt and profit laden and all these issues separately. But just for the sake of example, that like the justice and retribution and so on, like, isn't necessarily unloving.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. I agree. I did want to ask too, did you happen to see the show The Messiah on Netflix by chance?
No, I watched some of the God, what's the new one that everybody's crazy about on Angel?
Angel?
The Chosen.
The Chosen? I haven't heard of it.
That's like the big new show.
Oh, okay. I'll have to peep it.
It's all right. I mean, it's not terrible, but Christians are eating it up. You know, it's more like traditional Jesus show. Anyway, so
Gotcha.
I haven't seen all of it. There's some cool moments.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh, he's meeting Mary, and, you know.
I would recommend the show The Messiah.
Okay.
It's kind of about what it would be like to be a Messiah in today's world with social media.
Yeah, and everything. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's interesting.
Cool.
How he speaks, how he acts, the miracles. And, you know, it leads me to the question, like, could there be a Messiah in this day and age? Are there, and we just don't know about them, and maybe we'll know about them after their death and way later. But it's definitely an intriguing thought. It's like, could there be a Jesus today, a Lao Tzu today, a Buddha today? You know, have you ever thought about that?
I think there's enlightened beings everywhere, all the time. One of my favorite podcasts is called Buddha at the Gas Pump.
Oh, nice.
Which is that idea, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen Mitchell, he talked about Wayne Dyer's translation of Tao Te Ching. Stephen Mitchell is a Zen teacher, translator. He has probably the most famous translation of Tao Te Ching. His Zen teacher, super advanced guy, fixed washing machines. You know, that was like his day job.
Wow. And
I just love that image of like the laundromat repairman is actually like, you know, a 99.8% enlightened person.
Absolutely.
And even washing the minds of, you know, it's like, I mean, my Apache teacher was a probation officer. You know, he was like a very deep energy healer and did ceremonies, and, you know, he literally healed people with his in his rituals. And he was a probation officer. He consulted parolees, you know, gang unit guys. I mean, it's kind of like the whole idea around like a messiah, I think, implies like fame and like public notoriety and so on, and like that's not necessarily you know, I'm not, you know, I think there are famous saints. There are one of the most famous saints right now who's alive that I do think is either enlightened or close is named Amachi, or Ama. Timothy Conway, I'm a big fan of. He's endorses her. A lot of mystics that I like say that she's very high up there, and she has a global following. She's humanitarian. All she does all day is feed people. She gives hugs. She's called the Hugging Saint.
I have heard of her.
Okay, yeah. So she, you know, I mean, it's like they consider her a divine mother incarnation.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So yeah, you know, she has hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of followers. So they, you know, that those people exist, but also maybe the washing machine repairman, you know, maybe the parole officer is actually doing, you know, aligned with the divine, and the fame aspect of it is just it very little consequence.
1000%, man. Yeah, I think it's good to be open to that, because you do never know who you're interfacing with. It's crazy. Like, I have had that. I've seen the sparkle in the eye of the gas station attendant guy who I'm buying some.
Who knows?
Yeah, dude. It's like I'm buying some blunt wraps. I'm about to get lit. But dude, the way this guy just looked into my soul, whoa, like you could just sense something deep in there, you know?
Well, the non-dualist, there's only one of us anyway, so you know, we're all just masks of the one, baby.
1000%. I absolutely love that. Well, dude, thank you so much for your time today. There's so much more. I'm gonna have to invite you back because we just did not have enough time. But I did want to invite you to, talk about your podcast for a moment. Invite people to check out what you're doing and any other work that you want to shout out.
Thanks so much, Matt. I appreciate it. Enjoyed our conversation. Yeah, I'm kind of reawakened my podcast. The new brand is Karmic Relief. And so it's just YouTube, Spotify, Apple Pods. And I'm just kind of still making content around my book at Original Sin is a Lie, Instagram and TikTok. And at Karmic Relief. I think it's at Karmic Relief Pod. Are my main two areas. I also have a day job. I have a 4.5-year-old, so I'm busy. But just kind of slowly. I want to write another book. Eventually, I've kind of put so much content out. It's almost a matter of compiling that and kind of, Original Sin is a Lie is very all over the place. Some people are like, oh, I thought the whole thing was going to be about the original sin doctrine. I'm glad it wasn't. It's like, no, the original sin doctrine is like, first few dozen pages, and then it gets on into mystic philosophy. But, definitely, I'll be working on this stuff forever. I've been doing it for 20 years, and as long as I'm pumping oxygen, I'll be pointing people to mystics.
Let's go. Likewise, brother. Well, awesome. Thank you once again for being here. Thank you to all the listeners, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Beautiful. Thanks, brother.
Thanks, brother.